This is how willpower becomes a habit, by choosing a certain behavior ahead of time, and then following that routine when an inflection point arrives. Charles Duhigg. Whether we are aware of it or not, so many of our daily actions are driven by habits that it's scary. See, we make a choice to do something, and we like how it turns out. Then, 3 weeks later, we find ourselves doing the same thing at the same time every single day. Many of these habits we aren't aware of. And then there is another group that we are painfully aware of, the bad habits that we want to change. Smoking is a prime example. We know we shouldn't smoke. It's not healthy. But it is so hard to stop. Why is that? In Charles Duhigg's book, The Power of Habit, he explains how and why habits are formed, how they work, and maybe most importantly for many of us, how to change them. Let's first look at the habit loop. The habit loop is basically just a formula that our brain follows that results in a known outcome. The habit loop is a cue plus a routine equals a reward. Let's start by looking at the cue. This starts the cycle in the process. It could be the way you drive to work, a time of day, someone mentioning a type of food, or even an emotional state. Think back to smokers. How many smokers tie this habit to boredom or stress? How often have you heard of a former smoker slipping up and taking a drag during a time of extreme stress? The routine could be any action that follows the cue. It could be lighting a cigarette or driving a certain way to work or even a specific workout. And finally, the reward is the benefit that we get. Reducing stress after smoking or the high that runners get when they finish a long run are both examples. Cigarette and food companies have taken advantage of this for many years. The smokers are obvious, but let's look at McDonald's. They engineered their French fries to melt in your mouth immediately, making the reward instantaneous and thus much more addictive. The rewards eventually help to form a craving, which can start the whole loop over again. The next point is the presence of habits. For better or worse, once a habit is formed, it is hiding under the surface waiting for the right cue to make it start up again. There is a story that David Foster Wallace writes about this very thing. There are these two young fish swimming along, and they happen to meet an older fish swimming the other direction, who nods at them and says, "Morning, boys, how's the water?" And the two young fish swim on for a bit, and eventually one of them looks over at the other and goes, "What the hell is water?" Your habits are the water. Now, on to Keystone Habits. Habits that have a significant impact on our lives are known as Keystone Habits. These habits can influence our lives so much that it is really important to get these ones right. Exercise is a well-known keystone habit. People who regularly exercise tend to eat better, sleep more, and with higher quality, and have no habits like excessive drinking or smoking. By focusing on keystone habits, we don't need to fix 100 smaller ones. We just have to get a few big ones right. So, how do you create these new keystone habits? Or how do you create habits in general? It's pretty simple. You just need to create a habit loop for it. And then nurture that craving so that in time it's irresistible. Say you want to run each afternoon after work. Maybe your cue is to bring your running shoes and clothes with you and change before leaving work. The routine is obviously doing the run, and the reward might be a recovery shake or drink that you really enjoy afterwards. Whatever the reward is, you need to choose something strong enough that you will start to crave it. By doing this, your brain will start to expect the reward, and not only will the cue trigger the routine, but it will also trigger a craving for the next reward that your brain knows is coming. Next, let's look at changing bad habits. We already covered the fact that you cannot lose a habit, that it's like water, just waiting to resurface. So, if you can't lose a habit, how can you change one to be something more positive? Let's say you want to stop smoking. You know that anytime you get stressed out or angry, you smoke. The cue is already strongly set, and the reward for smoking, feeling a sense of relief, is also ingrained. The only piece of the loop left to change is the routine. So, what if, instead of smoking, you pop a piece of gum in your mouth and chew until your anger starts to abate? or you eat a snack bag of your favorite potato chips, or you take a walk. The routine must be something that works for you and leaves you with the same reward that smoking used to. The author provides us with a 4-step process to help change a habit. The first step is to identify the routine. This is usually the easiest part of the habit to identify. Let's say that you go home every day from work and binge watch a few hours of Netflix before going to bed. The routine is pretty obvious. It's binge watching Netflix. So what's the cue? And what is the reward? Step 2 is to experiment with rewards. In the Netflix example, maybe the reward is that you get to take your mind off your work and zone out. What if you could do this by working out, learning to cook, or picking up a new skill, or even spending time with friends? Not all of these things will get you the same reward that you are going to get from Netflix, so it is important to experiment to see which one suits you. Next up, the third step is to isolate the cue. This step seems easy at first, but it might not be that cut and dry. The Netflix example seems easy. When you get home, you start to binge watch. But do you start binge watching because you get home, or because your girlfriend, roommates, or family members already are there doing it? Can you go home and not sit on the couch to stop the loop before it starts? Isolating the cue that starts the habit loop is not always as easy as you'd assume. To help, the author gives us 5 categories that most cues fall into. 1 is location, 2 time, 3 emotional state, 4 other people, and 5 immediately preceding an action. The last step, have a plan. By this step, you should have a really good idea as to the cue that triggers the loop, the reward that you're trying to achieve, and the routine that you'd like to develop or change. In the Netflix example, you determine the cue to the loop is sitting on the couch. So the next day, when you go home, you immediately go to the kitchen and start preparing a meal. You eat that meal at the table while reading or talking to your partner. If you never sit down on the couch, the binge watching never starts. Most habits will take time and effort to effectively change. The important part is that you start thinking about the habits that you have and those that you want. Remember, this is how willpower becomes a habit, by choosing a certain behavior ahead of time and then following that routine when an inflection point arrives. Charles Duhigg. Most habits will take time and effort to effectively change. The important part is that you start thinking about the habits that you have and those that you want. Check out our summaries of Tiny Habits and Atomic Habits if you like this book review. Both are great books to cement the process of habits and changing them even more. And before you jump over to those videos, make sure that you hit that thumbs up button and subscribe here first.